According to Freud, a dream is a fulfillment of suppressed or repressed wish. The dream's wishes have to assume a disguise in order to achieve their aim and get through to consciousness. The work of Lacan is a reinterpretation of Freud in the light of structuralist and post-structuralist theories and maintains not only that the unconscious is structured like a language, but that is product of language. Lacan has a concept of chaos, but it is not a chaos of thoughts. He has a difficult concept called the real. The real is that upon which language is at work. It is that which lies beyond the insistence of the science. Contrary to Freud's opinion that unconsciousness existed before language, Lacan sees the unconsciousness as coming into being simultaneously with language. The long tradition of Marxist literary theory has been concerned with the question of how literature, along with other arts, came to develop out of social life and what causes literary works to assume the form they do. Marxism advocates classless society based on the common ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange. French Marxist theoretician Louis Althusser has influenced the recent Marxist thought on literature. He says, ideology is a system of representation endowed with an existence and an historical role at the heart of a given society. Marxist critics relate the context of work to the social class status of the author. Marxist relates the literary work to the social assumption of time in which it is consumed. The sort of criticism is also known as culture materialism. The major development in literary studies has been the emergence of feminist criticism. Feminist criticism reflects the political goals of feminism in accordance with feminist ideology. Ellen Showalter advocates gynocriticism, in which the concerns of the women as writer are central. Hélène Cixous, the most influential French feminist theorist, is of the opinion that language is the crucial area of concern, and to resist phallocentrism or male domination of culture, women have to find their own linguistic space. Ellen Showalter says the feminist critic is essentially political and polemical, with theoretical affiliations to Marxist ideology and aesthetics. In contrast to this angry or loving fixation on male literature, the program of gynocritics is to construct a female framework for the analysis of women literature to develop new models based on the study of female experience. Attention was switched to the need to construct a new canon of women's writing by rewriting the history of the novel and to poetry, in which a way that neglected women writers were given new prominence. Ellen Showalter describes the change in late 1970s as a shift of attention from androtexts to gynotexts. Feminist criticism is a feminist perspective in the belief of male-woman equality and corresponding balance in nature. Freud based his theories on masculine development, that women must envy the male's penis and, in the form of an engulfing mother, castrate her sons. Simone de Beauvoir, making distinction, says in her famous book, The Second Sex, one is not born a woman, rather one becomes a woman. The lesbian and gay studies reader tells us that lesbian gay studies does for sex and sexuality approximately what women's studies does for gender. Classic feminism had ignored lesbianism. This view has been countered by the modern feminists, who are of the opinion that lesbianism is the most complete form of feminism. Rich says, I mean the term lesbian continues to include a range through which a woman's life and throughout history of woman identified experience, not simply the fact that a woman has had or consciously described genital sexual experience with another woman. Peter Barry says, the main point of post-structuralism was to deconstruct binary opposition, like that between speech and writing, for instance, showing firstly that the distinction between paired oppositions is not absolute, since each term in the pairing can only be understood and defined in terms of the other. Hence, is lesbian gay studies, the pair heterosexual homosexual is deconstructed. Cultural materialism and new historicism are forms of historical criticism that takes into account contemporary critical theory, particularly Foucault and neo-Marxist theory. The term cultural materialism was formulated by Raymond Williams. New historicism and cultural materialism reject literary texts over other forms of discourse. New historicism and cultural materialism reject literary texts over other forms of discourse. New historicism concentrates on contemporary texts with literary text. Cultural materialism concentrates on the literary text within a modern political context. According to Peter Barry, a simple definition of the new historicism is that it is a method based on the parallel reading of literary and non-literary texts, usually of the same historical period. New historicism refuses, at least ostensibly, to privilege the literary foreground and historical background. New historicism is anti-establishment. It believes in personal freedom and celebration of all forms of ideas. Though it is founded upon post-structuralist thinking, it avoids the dense style and vocabulary of pre-structuralists. Juxtaposing literary and non-literary texts, it focused attention on state power and the notion of Derrida's theory of reality being textualized and the discursive practice as determined by Foucault. Historical context undermines the transcendent significance. Traditionally, according to the literary text, theoretical method signifies the break with liberal humanism and the absorption of structuralism, post-structuralism, and other postmodern approaches. Political commitment signifies the influence of Marxist and feminist perspective. Textual analysis locates the critique of traditional approaches, where it cannot be ignored. Cultural materialism includes culture of all forms of culture, forms like television, popular music, and fiction, and opposite of idealistic belief. Edward Said's Orientalism exposes the Eurocentric universalism, which takes for granted both the superiority of what is European or Western and the inferiority of what is not. Homi Bhabha says, an important feature of colonial discourse is its dependence on the concept of fixity in the ideological construction of otherness. Deconstruction is a constant reminder of the etymological link between crisis and criticism. Deconstruction is the active antithesis of everything that criticism ought to be, if not accepts traditional values and concepts. Deconstruction can be seen in part as a vigilant reaction against the tendency in structuralist thought to tame and domesticate. Derrida has demanded the concept of a structure that serves to immobilize the meaning in a text. He argues that philosophers have been able to impose their various systems of thought only by ignoring or suppressing the disruptive effects of language. Deconstruction is therefore an activity of reading which means closely tied to the texts it interrogates and which can never set up independently as a self-enclosed system of operation. There can be no definitive meaning. Barbara Johnson, in her book The Critical Difference, says, deconstruction is not synonymous with destruction. It is in fact much closer to the original meaning of the word analysis, which means to undo. The deconstruction of a text does not proceed by random doubt or arbitrary subversion, but by the careful teasing out of warring factions of significance within the text. Derrida is of the opinion that a deconstructive reading must always aim at certain relationship unperceived by the writer between what he commands and what he does not command of the pattern of language that he uses. J.A. Cudden asserts that in deconstruction, a text can be read as saying something quite different from what it appears to be saying. It may be read as carrying a plurality of significance or as saying many different things which are fundamentally at variance. It may be read as carrying plurality of significance or as saying many different things which are fundamentally at variance with, contradictory to, and subversive of what may be seen by criticism as a single stable meaning. Thus, a text may betray itself. In deconstruction, meaning may be contrary to the surface meaning. The text may have disunity rather than unity. It may have multiplicities of meaning. The most famous quotation belongs to Derrida, who in his famous book of Grammatology says that there is nothing outside the text. So we come to the end of criticism. And this critical note I have presented from the beginning to the end, and that is why I call it from birth to death. So I hope the students will like and will understand, and if they have any queries, can question or have interaction with me regarding their doubts. So this is very difficult. They have made it very difficult, but it's not very difficult. It's very interesting because we are living in a postmodern age, and in postmodern age, you have to counter so many things. You have to have knowledge of structuralism, you have to have knowledge of post-structuralism, you have to have knowledge of feminism and deconstruction, etc., etc. So I have covered right from Plato, Aristotle, and to modern period, Victorian period, modern period, romantic period, and then I have come down to postmodernism. So thank you very much for listening to my lectures, and I hope it will help in designing your course. Thank you.